not being in a church family, in a church community, but we were exposed, my brother and I, like I said, CME, and a lot of vacation Bible school, because I'm convinced that was the only thing that kept my mother sane during the summertime, was being able to take us to vacation Bible school. But I was very shy growing up, and I was the kind of quirky, nerdy kid. I loved music. I loved math. I loved reading. I was not athletic at all. My mom did put me in dance for a couple of years just to kind of help that along a little bit, and I'll always be grateful for that. But I tried to play softball one year and got nailed with a ball, and that was the only time that I managed to get on base. So I learned that that was not my thing. But that was okay. But because of the moving that we did, I ended up going to 4 different grade schools, and I know a lot of you are military, either growing up or in your married years, and you're accustomed to those moving things, and to me that created a lot of fear. It seemed like I was always the new kid. I was always unsure. I was always trying to measure up either with the level of expectation at my home or at school. I was be quiet and keep your head down and plow forward and be compliant, follow the rules. And but there was always a lot of fear. I was always trying to perform. I was always trying to get it right. And sometimes I did and sometimes I didn't. I have a lot of cards, but don't get too upset because I am visually impaired, so most of the cards don't have but about 10 words on them so that I can kind of see them as we go along, so it'll be okay. In the late 1970, my parents told us that they were getting a divorce, and in 1970, it was not a very common occurrence. We were in Midland. My mother decided to move us back to Wichita Falls, where she had family. Both sets of grandparents were still in Wichita Falls, and so we moved. And so I was in yet another grade school, and yet another time, and yet another, try to make some new friends, and the fear continued. I had a grandfather that passed away about 18 months later, my mother's dad, and my mother's parents were very, very influential in my life. My grandmother was one of those quiet, steadfast, loving people. She loved children even though they waited almost 10 years for my mom to be born. My grandmother was the one that was always the babysitter. She was the neighborhood babysitter. She had a daycare in her house. She worked as a paid daycare nursery worker at a big church in Wichita Falls for many years. And she loved kids. And I like to think that I got that from her. And so when I lost my grandfather, it was very devastating to us as a family, and to me in particular, because I was so close with my grandparents. Eventually, in grade school, I did get a good friend. Her dad was the pastor at the little neighborhood church that was about 3 blocks away, and this family was a God-centered family, a mature family. My parents were very, very young, and so they were it was kind of a shock to me to have a friend whose parents were older and more mature and just did things in a different way because the Lord was the center of their home. And it was a tiny church, but I learned so much there. When I was in junior high, my Sunday school teacher took 3 of the 5 of us in the Sunday school class, and you know how junior high kids are. There was a Billy Graham ministry film at one of the theaters downtown, Wichita Falls, and this precious lady took 3 of us down to see this movie. And at the end of that movie, they gave a call to come forward and to surrender your life to Christ. And I heard this message in my heart for the first time. And the offer of eternal life was amazing, but the offer of Jesus' peace resonated so deeply within me because I'd lived in fear with this fear for so long, and the peace that in this the verse from John, he says, I'm going to give you peace. I'm going to give you my peace. I didn't have to manufacture it. I didn't have to muster it up. I didn't have to sustain it. It was his, and it was a gift to me. I couldn't earn it. I could never be good enough. And that was okay. That was what his gift was to me. And it wasn't as the world gives. It was going to be here today and yanked out from under me tomorrow. It wasn't going to change as I changed. It was eternal. And so the transition from fear to being in God's peace began. Now, I was young, and I didn't always have a really good family influence. And so there were choices that I was making as I got older, and choices in what classes to take, and choices about who to hang out with, and choices about what my life was going to be like. And sometimes I asked the Lord about it and prayed about it, and sometimes I made choices on my own and paid the consequences. But the Lord was always watching out for me because that's who he is. His grace and his mercy was there. And so I'm this geeky girl, and I graduate from high school, and I'm going to Midwestern, and I'm going to get a degree in business administration, and things are going to happen. And I had a really bad breakup from a really bad relationship. And was reintroduced to someone that I had known as a friend, and his name was Billy. And he lived in Fort Worth, and I was in Wichita Falls, and through a family member, we kind of reintroduced and reconnected, and we started dating. And I didn't know what all I didn't know, but I knew that there were some things that I did know that were really important. And he was a new believer, and I was not a new believer in years, but a new believer as far as my maturity. So we did have some discussions about where we were in our walk with the Lord, and I had a peace. And so even though we did not date really long, I still had that at peace. And so in February of 1982, we got married. And I was going to move again to Fort Worth. Now, I was the one in college. I had girls' friends, and they were all like, I can't wait to get out of here. I want to finish up. I want to go take on the world. I was a happy camper in Wichita Falls. I was good. Who was the first one to move away from Wichita Falls to Fort Worth? Yeah, it was me. But again, God transitioned me from fear into peace. And we started our life together. The first couple of years were as new marriages can be. There were peaks and there were valleys. We had not been married and living in our place for very long when we got a knock on the front door on a Tuesday evening. And yep, that was back when a lot of churches did visitation on Tuesday evenings. And 3 young people from a neighborhood church said, we understand you're new in the neighborhood, and we just wanted to come and welcome you to Fort Worth. And we invited them in, and they asked us eventually about where we were spiritually and asked us if we had a church home, and we did not. We hadn't even hardly gotten everything unpacked yet, so we had not even stopped to consider that. It wasn't on our radar, and they invited us to their church. We go to this church and visit, and we find out that the associate pastor and his wife are from Wichita Falls. So we felt at home. We visited for a pretty good while, and then we eventually joined the church. And the morning that we joined the church, we were invited, and it was an early service, and we were invited by a couple of other about our age couples, come and go to our Sunday school class. I said, okay, cool, we're on. We go, and it is a Sunday school class that's primarily composed of students at Southwestern Seminary, which is right across the road from this church. So we are immediately surrounded by other young couples who are pretty new in their marriage, and they're all away from home. And these young men are pursuing their call to ministry. Some of them are getting degrees in divinity, and some of them in religious education and other things. And they are just so on fire for God, and they're so excited to share what they're learning, and their wives are so tired of hearing it every day. And Billy and I come in, and we're just soaking it up. God's blessing us over and over and over. And we made such precious friends during that time, and some of them we're still in communication with over 40 years later. And some of them, even though we've not been in contact with for 30 or 35 years or 40 years, if we contacted them today, we could pick up like we just left off, because that's the kind of love that God gives you in a community like that. So God's planted us in a church home, and there's an opportunity for us to start a business. We hadn't even been married 6 months, but we didn't know what we didn't know. And so we start work. We start work out of the spare bedroom, and we work like you work when you have a new business, and it's days and nights and weekends and 24/7. And God blesses, because even though we hadn't asked him, he blessed, because that's how he is. He's full of grace and mercy. And sometimes you fall into his will and you don't even know it. So we're working, and the business is growing, and I didn't tell you, it's wholesale optical. Now, Billy has been in the wholesale optical business since he was in high school here in Wichita Falls, and he graduated in '73. So even in the early '80s, he'd been in the business for quite some time, and he had a reputation for integrity and creativity and working hard. And so the business was growing, and our name was getting out there, and we were doing pretty frou-frou glasses for people. And one day, we're driving back and forth between Fort Worth and Wichita Falls, coming to check in with the parents and all of those things. And Billy says, "What's that? Something about that sign?" I said, "What sign?" And we're on it before I can read what the sign says. And he starts asking me a couple of other questions. Well, it becomes apparent that something's going on, and I mean, we're in the wholesale optical business, so it's not like we don't know some doctors. So I make an appointment, and I go in, because it's been a couple of years since, and the doctor says, And you know when the doctor says, you're in for a ride. So he says, "I'm not sure what's going on, but I'm going to send you to someone else." I love those doctors. You know, sometimes you go into a doctor and he's so full of himself. He's like, "I got it. We're okay. I know it all." This guy, he knew his limits. He knew that what was going on was above and beyond what he wanted and was able to deal with. So he got me into a specialist, and I'm talking to my mom every night, and she's, "What's going on?" "I don't know, Mom. We're just taking it one day at a time." So I get in, see the specialist. He says, "I want to do some tests." I said, "Okay, we're going to do some tests." He does some tests, and I'm waiting for him to call me back. And he goes on vacation. And my mama's calling me every night. And I'm 23 years old, and I'm a compliant, and I'm a don't make a fuss girl. And finally, I called the office at the end of the week, and I said, "I haven't heard anything back." They said, "Oh, yeah, he's gone on vacation." So God is God. The doctors are not God. So that Monday, at the end of the workday, the doctor calls me. And he says, "Well, I need to tell you, you've got a form of macular degeneration." It's 1983. I had no idea what he was talking about. And as he's explaining to me, and he said, "Yeah," and he said, "A lot of times this happens with mature people, but what you have is a form that is hereditary. It's a congenital malfunction. And so it's a little bit different. And I can't tell you exactly what's going to happen or when it's going to happen, but you're not going to be able to drive, and you're not going to be able to see the signature line and write a check, and you're not going to be able to read the can on the shelf in the grocery store." But that's about all I can tell you. Do you have any questions? No, thank you. I've been hammered enough for one day. I think I'm going to take this information and just think about it for a while. So we're dealing with this. We're processing. Eventually, God did lead me to, several years later, I went to a retina specialist, and he said, I could tell you to go home and to sit on the couch and to wait for whatever's going to happen. Or I can encourage you to get out and to do everything that you're big and bad and brave enough to do, as long as you're not hurting anybody else, and live your life. So that's what we did. We continued to grow in the business. We did what we could do. We did trips. Eventually, I did have to stop driving, and that was a major issue. And there was fear. There was fear of what's going to happen and when it's going to happen and how it's going to happen. But God was faithful. And the summer after I had to quit driving, I was 29. And that was pretty rough because I was the girl that at 16, my daddy was in the used car business, and he and my mama had managed to get me a car. So you go from that to a dependence in a pretty major way. And my sweet husband, when I turned 30 the next year in January, took me on a little trip. He said, "Let's go." I said, "Okay, let's go." And I get in, and I promptly fall asleep, and I wake up, and I don't know where we are. We're not on the road between Fort Worth and Wichita Falls, because I'm knowing 287 pretty well. So where are we going? He said, "We're going to Gainesville, and I've signed up. You're going to be able to skydive." Now, I had said in passing more than once, I think that would be so cool to skydive. Be careful what you ask for. So we did. And we didn't. I did. We didn't. After the fact, I found out that Billy had told everyone, all of our friends, all of our neighbors, all of our family, except for my mother, because he knew that she would not be amused. But he said afterwards he had trouble going to sleep the night before, until it finally occurred to him that I was the one that was going to jump out of the plane, not him. So what was he worried about? So I went and I did it, and it was magnificent. And I was encouraged, and I was empowered with what I still could do if I would just give God a chance to turn my fear into peace. So the business did as businesses do sometimes, and peaks and valleys happen. And when you're making really fancy schmancy pretty glasses and the economy turns, people aren't spending money on fancy schmancy glasses. So we closed the business and we went to work for other people in the optical business. And we worked in several different places for several different people, and they were all different, they were all unique. They hired Billy, they got me. They said, "Oh, by the way, you can hire me and you can have Robin too, because she's really good with the phone and calming people down, and she's good with the bookkeeping, and she's just got a multitude of stuff that she can do. So it's kind of a 2-for-1 thing." So we got hired on Billy's reputation, and I ended up being okay and pulling my own weight. At one point, I actually did even sell eyeglasses. Now, if you don't think that God has a sense of humor, he has put a blind chick in the optical business, and now she's selling other people glasses. So I was not the color me beautiful person. I was not the face shape and the, all of this stuff, but I had an intimate knowledge of being able to look at an eyeglass prescription and know what those lenses are going to look like when they're manufactured and when they're put into a frame. So I took that and I ran with it. And I was working with some really beautiful, stellar, learned opticians who'd been selling glasses for years, and they took me in and they helped me along, and they valued what I brought. And then eventually, time for Shishi Fufu glasses came again. So Billy says, let's start our own business again. And I said, okay. And we knew what we knew. We didn't know what we didn't know, but we knew what we knew, and we knew what we had learned in the 10 years since we had started the first business. So we started at home. We always had people that worked with us, and I always say worked with us. We paid them, and they may have worked for us, but they worked with us. And many of them were from our church community. We were able to have a business that would provide flexible hours and flexible options for young men and women that were at the seminary that needed jobs and valued working in a small environment. And so God blessed us with more relationships and more friendships and more people that worked with us and helped us achieve our goals. And during that time, if you were in the optical business and you went to one of the big national trade shows and you said the name Billy Brock, people knew who you meant. God managed to align us with a frame company who's internationally known, and they had the best trained sales staff in the industry in the United States, bar none. And through negotiations, we partnered with the sales staff, and they took our work and put it out. And at one point in time, we had customers that we were making glasses for from Maine to Florida and from Washington State to California and in Hawaii. And people were wearing pretty glasses, and they knew that they had a Billy Brock. And I often said at trade shows that I had a lot of glasses, and I had a lot of one-of-a-kind pairs of glasses until the second pair was made. During this time, we got away from our church community. We got busy. We got out of the habit. We got full of ourselves, and we got away from the church community. And thankfully, God never gave up on us. He never left us where we were. One of the ladies that worked with us for several years quit work because she and her husband had their first baby. And we were so excited for them. And she came over one afternoon and was showing us the baby, and I was playing with the baby, and we were talking and catching up and had a really good visit. And then we're walking to the door, and she said, I'm going to go tomorrow to the exercise class at my church, and it's a step aerobics class. And my husband, ever helpful, says, oh, Robin's always wanted to do step aerobics, which was very true. So I go to step aerobics class, and along with the exercise, I meet this wonderful group of women, and I start forming relationships. And the fear of something new and something different, but something necessary, becomes peace, because God says, this is where I want you to be for your spiritual health, for your spiritual stability. And eventually, I did join that church. And I was hanging out in the nursery before and after church and playing with the baby kids and not having kids of our own. I'm always loving on everybody else's baby kids. And the children and preschool minister one morning says, "Hey, you tend to hang out around here an awful lot. And the kids really seem to love you, and I love you, and Vacation Bible School is in a couple of weeks. And would you come and help me in the preschool area?" So fear. I don't teach. Teachers have really pretty handwriting and are very organized and are very crafty and artsy and all that stuff, and I'm not any of those things. But I love preschoolers, so yeah, I'll help you. And that was the beginning of decades, multiple decades of loving and imparting to baby kids the things that I had not gotten as a kid. The love of God, the love that God has for us, that God created us, that God created all around us, everything. That church is a place where other people who love God and know God come and learn about Him. And to be a missionary. And to be a missionary doesn't necessarily mean that God is going to call you to go to China or Africa or New Mexico. No offense to anybody in New Mexico. But that even as a 3-year-old, that you can know that God loves you and that you can tell other people that God loves you at the playground, at your school, at the grocery store, when you go home and talk to your mama and your daddy. A lot of people don't value preschoolers. They look in at the preschool area, the nursery, the preschool area, and they say, "All y'all are doing is just playing." Well, that's their job. When you're 3, that's your job. That's how you learn. That's how you build relationships. And that's how God works, is while you're playing. And I didn't have any better knowledge or sense than to get down on the floor. I'm a floor sitter. I always saw my grandmother sitting on the floor with the kids, playing with the kids, talking to the kids, down on their level, getting into their hearts. And God taught me that I could teach kids and I could come alongside kids and their families and help them know and love and deepen their relationship with God. And those are things that are so special, that the influence is so concrete and so long-standing. So even though I've never had any children biologically, I have an awful lot of kiddos out there that I got the opportunity, the blessing of helping to plant early, tiny seeds that grow up. So meanwhile, at home, we're going through another cycle, and business is kind of slowing down, and we get a call from Billy's younger brother, who's general manager of a construction company, new home construction. And he says, "Hey, Rob," because he's the only person in the world that calls me Rob. And he says, "Hey, Rob, my bookkeeper really needs some help 1 day a week. Do you think that'd be something that you'd be interested in doing?" And I'm thinking, yeah, because we could use some extra money and opportunities. And so talked to Billy, and we're like, yeah. So one day a week for the next 8 years, we get up early in the morning in Fort Worth, and we travel over to Dallas. And God has blessed me yet again, because the lady that is the bookkeeper is a godly woman. And she's a godly woman that's mature in her faith. And she's a godly woman that is very perceptive, because you can be a blind bookkeeper in your own business when you're able to control your environment. But when you're going into someone else's business and someone else's office after not working for someone else for a long time, it's rather intimidating. So God allowed again the fear to turn to peace, and my relationship with my friend Penny started. And we worked together, and she encouraged, and she figured out pretty quick that some things needed to be tweaked, but there wasn't anything that we couldn't put our heads together to figure out how to make it work. And we did. And about that time, my mom started having some health issues. She started having some cognitive issues. And because she and I were so close, I started noticing some things a lot sooner than many other people did. And eventually we talked to her doctor, and then were sent to a neurologist and did some tests. And in her early 60s, it was determined that she had Alzheimer's. So I'm not an only child, but I like to say I'm the only daughter. And I wanted to be closer to my mama, to help my mama out. And I started praying, Lord, we need to get back to Wichita Falls. Now, we're living in Fort Worth, and we're working some in Dallas, and how in the world are we going to get back to Wichita Falls? I don't know, God, but that's the deepest desire of my heart right now, is that we need to get back to Wichita Falls. Our schedules were such that I was able to come home for several years, Wichita Falls, and spend every other weekend with my mom and stepdad. I was able to go to appointments with them. I was able to help in her medication. I was able to do a lot of things from a distance. But I knew I needed to be back in Wichita Falls. So one day in February in 2012, 6 younger brother says, hey, need to meet with y'all. We go to lunch. He said, the business is doing so well, we need to hire not 1, but 2 full-time people. And I want you, Billy, my brother, and I want you, Robin, to come move to Wichita Falls and to come to work for me full-time. I don't have a poker face. That day I had to play it really cool. Oh, okay. That's very interesting. We get in the car, and I said, oh, my word, I can't believe. So we talk, and we make a decision pretty quickly, and in a month, we are packed. We are moving to Wichita Falls. We are moving out of our house where we've been for 30 years. And we're moving to Wichita Falls. So we get back. Things are good, but things are hard. If you don't remember, 2012 was not the year that we had 90 consecutive days at 100 degrees or over, But because in the middle of 2012, there was one day where it did not make it up, or over 100. It was brutal. It was brutal. The person I was working directly for, my manager, was not a lover of women. He didn't see a lot of value in what I thought or anything like that. But anyway, God worked that out. But I was able to see my mama most every day from the end of March until she passed away 8 months later. Now, I have to tell you, when we moved, my mama was still at home. She was still doing her laundry. She had glitches, but she was still. And in 8 months, she was gone. So I knew that God had been in control yet again. So when we left Fort Worth, the housing market in Fort Worth was not real great. We were able to wait a little bit as we're working. And the day comes where we have a friend in Fort Worth that says, if you're ready to sell your house in Fort Worth, we're committed to be back in Wichita Falls. We're ready. Let me put it on the market. Put it on the market. It sold within weeks. We got multiple contracts within days. So the question is, where did we move to? We'd been living in a rental property. Where do we go? We do some praying, we do some thinking, we do some research, and we start thinking about the vantage point. Well, it's this big high-rise, fancy schmancy condo building. I know where it is. I grew up 3 blocks away from that place. But our realtor says, if that's kind of what you're interested in, let me contact the business manager and we'll see what we can find out and what's available. And we're doing research and we're asking questions. And we start getting reply emails from this guy, Brent Spray, president, Vantage Point HOA Board of Directors. And it's always what we needed to be answered. It's always good information, always. If it ever is at the moment, I'm not sure, let me find out and I'll get back with you. So then, okay. So we go and we look and we find the perfect little place. It's got walls that are all different colors. It's not beige. The bedroom's this beautiful sky blue, so I had blue skies every morning when I woke up. The kitchen was red and black, and you're going, oh, red and black. Go Coyotes. We were on board. It was where we wanted our new home to be, so we moved into the Vantage Point. And also, because we had so much going on, because especially 2012 was so hard, physically and emotionally and spiritually, with everything that went on. After my mom died, I was empty. I had enough to keep working, but I was finally ready to look for a new church home, and I'd continued to be in contact with Billy's older brother, because every time I talked to him, he was so pleased about his little church, the church where he was going and what was going on. And on Easter Sunday in 2013, actually the week before, I called him and I said, I'm going to come. And I was blessed with another special, loving church family who loved on me, who nurtured me, who let me sit and breathe. and were able to minister to me. And there weren't any kids, but that's okay. This little congregation, I won't go any further. I don't have any idea what time it is, so I'm just going. I'll tell you about it someday. After I'd been there for a couple of years, children started coming, and I had opportunities to teach grade school kids, and I'd never taught grade school kids, but these were kids that came in and had not had any exposure to church or the Bible or God. They didn't know Noah or David and Goliath or any of those things. So I was able to take everything that God had gifted me with by teaching preschoolers for so long and gear it to a little bit more age appropriate, and was able to plant seeds with those kids too. So eventually things were happening in our physical neighborhood, and Billy comes home one day and he says, Barney, this is his younger brother, Barney and I went to lunch today. I'm like, oh dear. That doesn't usually bode well for my status quo. He said, he thinks that we need to build a house out on part of their property in southern Clay County. Now, I am not a girly girl. I mean, I cut my own hair, and, I am pretty comfortable with casual clothes, and anyway. But I've never lived outside the city limits. So there that fear thing comes again. But God impressed upon me that we needed to do this. Because this is what my husband needed for his heart to be happy again. So on the last day of December in 2019, we signed a listing agreement to sell our condo, and they broke ground. And then in March of 2020, COVID happened. You see this pattern of fear? So I'm packing, I'm praying and packing and praying. And things opened up again a little bit in May. And on the 3 weeks before, we had already decided that we were going to move into our newly completed home. We got an offer and did a little negotiating, and it was a cash deal, and the contract was to close on the exact date that the movers were coming to take all of our furniture down to our new home in southern Clay County. So from fear to peace again. Now what I left out, backtracking, I got to loop around just a little bit, because I'm the blind chick in the optical business as a bookkeeper who eventually gets to that certain age where normal people's arms aren't quite long enough, so you have to start wearing glasses. Well, my husband had gotten into technology and the things that were offered in the optical business that could help low vision people along. But there's a point where a blind bookkeeper has to hang it up. And that time came for me. And the world is so focused on, what do you do? One of the first things most of us encounter questions when you meet someone, what do you do? Where are you? Are you married? Where are you from? Are you married or not? Family, kids. What do you do? What's your occupation? What's your job? So I had to stop working. And I went on disability. And I had spent the last 30 years proving that I was not disabled. But in order to qualify for the financial help that I was now willing to accept, we had to fill out all those reams and reams of paperwork, and we had to admit, and Billy's helping me fill out, and something came up about what's the nature of your disability, and he says, well, you're not disabled. I said, don't say that out loud, because that's kind of what the purpose of all of this is. So again, fear into peace, and we were at a point, we had enough of a nest egg that we were able to make everything happen for the 8 months that it takes for you to get qualified and for them to decide you really and truly are disabled, even though you've been disabled for 30 years. And they start giving you a check. So I'm coping with not working. So what's my value? What's my job? And there are days that I still struggle with that. If I have your phone number and I give you a random text, part of what I think God has given me a ministry at this point is because I am able to slow down. I am able to have a little more time for the Holy Spirit to bring people and situations and opportunities to me. And so if I send you a text and say, I'm thinking about you and I'm praying about you today, or how are things going, or no, it's genuine. So we're in southern Clay County, and COVID's still going on, and it's getting better, and things are opening up a little bit, but I'm still streaming my little church service from a little church in Wichita Falls. And through all this time, our precious neighbors, Brent and Tammy, have become more than just neighbors. They're friends. They're family. They're people that we love. They're people that we trust. They're people that we have accomplished projects with. They're people that we've had laughs with. They're people that we've cried with. And through all this time, Brent and Tammy are, we're members down at the Cowboy Church in Henrietta. That's great. I like hearing about other people's churches and what's going on and everything. And Brent would say, we're having something special this Sunday. Why don't y'all come and visit? Okay, we'll come and visit. Or once in a while he would say, I'm gonna teach on something on Wednesday night, if you'd like to come. Yeah, we'd like to come. And one week, even though we've moved, Brent and Tammy are still maintaining a relationship with us. And Brent talks to Billy and he says, hey, so we've got a men's group. And they get together one Saturday evening a month. And I think you might enjoy meeting some of these guys. And so he goes. And God starts building those relationships. And then Sunday morning Sunday school starts opening up. And that's our sweet spot, is smaller, more intimate groups where you can really dig deep and you can love on each other and feel comfortable and open. And we've had the last several years of growing together spiritually, and through our marriage, and continuing to love on the Lord and praising Him for the love and the grace and the mercy that He's shown us. I wanted to end by reading a couple of verses to you that are special to me about peace. John 16:33. And most of these you guys are, I'm sure, really familiar with. I have told you these things so that bear with me. The bad thing about bad vision is when they're stressed, you can see even less than what you can see normally. So. I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world. Philippians 4:7 says, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds through Christ Jesus. Colossians 3:15. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body, and be thankful. In Isaiah 6:3, and this is the Lord speaking. He was speaking to, he said, you will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are stayed on you, because they trust in you. So, thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. One more thing. My husband thinks he's kind of demented in this way. He thinks I'm a great cook, which just means I cook the stuff that he really likes. So I love it. After 43 years, I love it. He also thinks I have a beautiful voice. I love to sing, and he has asked me to sing something, and I'm going to start, and if you guys will please join in with me, I appreciate it. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul. It is well, it is well with my soul. Go in peace.